Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Honest Conversations. We're just going to let everyone have a couple more minutes. We'll start at 3 o'clock. We've got 3 minutes. We're going to let people join, let our panelists settle in, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. All right, for those of you who have just joined us, we are just waiting to start until 3 o'clock, but we want to make sure that everyone has a chance to log in. We're so excited to have a conversation today. We have some amazing panelists and a great way to wrap up Hispanic Heritage Month. All right, we've got about a minute left. We have about 100 participants so far. That's really exciting. We want to make sure that we know where everyone is from, so be sure to participate in the chat. I know everyone's working on the same thing across the country and around the world, so we want to know where you're logging in from. All right, there we go. Seattle, Texas, Arkansas, Idaho. Ooh, Kentucky, another Idaho. Look at that. Michigan. Oh, I'm super excited. Panama, yay, look at that. Okay. Oh, Faith, I happen to see your name. Hi, Faith from Fayetteville. All right, everyone, it looks like it's 3 o'clock. We've got about 125 participants. I think we should get started. Lovely. So don't forget, throughout the conversation today, please feel free to put your questions in the chat box and in the Q&A. I have a couple amazing team members who are going to be pushing those to me. So welcome. My name is Katelyn Brewer. I'm the president of Darkness to Light. I go by she, her. And I have 3 amazing panelists with me today. Unfortunately, Ricardo De Leon had a family emergency, and so he couldn't attend. He sends his regrets, and he's really sorry. But I am a fan of people introducing themselves, and so I would love to start with Perla. Perla, you want to give a quick introduction?
Sure. Thank you, Caitlin. So I am Perla Freed. I'm the executive director for the YMCA Guardians for Child Protection. It's a group of CEOs whose focus is completely child abuse prevention. I just started work with them last November. Before that, I worked for the Catholic Archdiocese of Atlanta, and I am happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Of course. Rosa, would you like to go next?
Yes, of course. Thank you. So Rosa Beltré, pronoun she, hers, ella. I am the executive director of the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. We are the statewide coalition against sexual assault in the state of Ohio, and I'm an Afro-Latinx Taína, and I am honored to be with you today.
Thank you so much for joining. And Sylvia.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Sylvia Goalen Lopez, originally from Guatemala. And I currently work in local government. I have over 20 years experience in local government. I am a survivor, and I do own a small business called Redline 959, and we do safety and first aid training for the community, and I do specialize in teaching the Latin American community.
Amazing. Well, I feel honored. I've been excited all week to have this conversation. Before we jump right in, there are a couple housekeeping things. All participants are muted, and again, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature, and we'll try to get as many of your questions answered as possible. The chat is for networking and comments. Don't forget to let us know where you're signing in from, and know that this is a safe place. And so if you're triggered or you need to talk to someone, please make sure you use our free hotline, 866-4LIGHT, or text the word LIGHT to 741-741 for the crisis text line. And I do want to make an announcement. We're going to conduct this webinar in English today, but we do have plans to translate it to Spanish. And as soon as we get it back, we will be posting it on YouTube and sharing it. So for those who have Spanish-speaking networks who are interested in sharing this, we will have it translated to Spanish. All right, so as most of you know now, it is National Hispanic Heritage Month, which ends tomorrow. And in honor of celebrating that month, it was the brainchild of my team to bring together ardent advocates from around the country who work with Darkness to Light and prevent child sexual abuse and other forms of child abuse in their day-to-day lives. And so we really wanted to talk over the course of the month about stigma, vulnerability, how to minimize opportunities, how the social determinants of health influence the Hispanic and Latin community. And I don't know about you, but the 4 blogs and spotlights that we had this month really were just overwhelmingly informative. So I'm grateful to each one of you for taking the time to write a blog and share your stories and experience. And so our goal is to provide advocates outside of the Hispanic community with information that they can use to help work with those in the Hispanic community. We have a lot of facilitators who love to facilitate in a number of different communities. And so today it's just learning about what are the benefits and the nuances of working with a community that you're not a part of. So Rosa, because of your blog, I'm going to start with you. And I want to talk a little bit with you about what cultural sensitivity means and why it's important.
Thank you for that question, Katelyn. So important, especially for those that use cultural humility as the buzzword now, utilizing grants and trying to capture markets and being in tune. But it's so important that we start utilizing the terms and the words the way that they make the most impact and are important. So the reality is that when we're talking about that cultural humility or sensitivity is having that openness to understand that we don't know it all, right? That none of us are able to be fully competent in any language, any culture, any community that we actually serve. But when we go with an openness, in understanding that there is much more, that it's not always the way that we portray or that we think that things should be done, it gives us the opportunity to be able to connect much better with the communities that we really want to serve. There's something very peculiar in reference to the Latinx Hispanic community as a whole, as a culture in itself. It's a culture in itself. And it's that the community is tired of being used. Used for grants, used for deliverables, used for numbers, for data, right? So in order for the communities that are external, coming from the outside, that want to really tap into working with the community and making segue, it is all important to dismiss Maslow as we know it in those generative formats of becoming competent and in those layers and being a little bit more humble. And it is much more than the food that we eat, that one friend that we might have, or that community that we see. It's about trying to put each other in those shoes, reading a little bit more, allowing others to teach us, to lean in with understanding and with care.
Exactly. And I think, we've been having this conversation in multiple communities over the last few months. The death of George Floyd obviously has a lot of people reflecting on who they are and how they approach individuals that aren't like them. And I think this idea of humility and openness, it can seem so basic and duh, but at the end of the day, putting it into practice is what's going to reap the benefits of being able to understand and listen to what people have to say. Perla, I'm wondering, from a religious context, where that cultural humility and listening comes in. I know your past life, you used to work for a religious institution. Have you sort of thought about that at all?
Well, there's a huge population of Hispanic people in the Catholic Church here in America. I had the privilege to work for the Catholic Archdiocese of Atlanta. I'm originally from Honduras. And, this whole thing about humility, I love that Rosa brought this in. It's just not being Latina, and that makes you be part of the group. I am one of 6 sisters. I am one out of 6 sisters where parents had to work very hard, and I'm the one that left home. And I'm the first one to come here, and my daughter would be this, second generation. So it's very important to understand too the struggles that a lot of people that are here have gone through, understand where they're coming from, because every story is different. You have the whole immigration thing, and their immigration story might differ. I came here on a student scholarship to come to college. Others have had to struggle very hard to get here and be here, and they live with that fear constantly. So that also partakes on the whole child abuse prevention and why perhaps they don't reach out or they don't want to understand what resources might be available to them. All of that fear just, trickles down to their decisions or their lack of wanting to get help.
Exactly. And Sylvia, you talk about that in your blog. You address some pain point factors that don't allow for prevention in your community. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. And, similar to what Perla and Rosa stated, being Hispanic is more than, you're right, having that one Hispanic friend coming over because you want to eat my food. It's in reality is remembering to kind of educate yourself and be a little bit humble and understand where we all come from. In my blog, I talked a little bit about multi generations living together and opportunities being presented there. Although I am also similar to Perla, I'm number 2 of a family of 6 sisters, and then we have one brother, so there's 7 of us. We were always taught to respect our elders. We joke about it now as we're older. We were the ones that were allowed to tease the little brothers and sisters because we were the older ones and we were allowed to pick on them. But similar to that concept, when we were raised and we had aunts and uncles and grandparents that lived in the same household as we did, we are, even now, we're taught not to speak up, not to be loud, not to be vulgar, not to be that woman that, we would love to be, but we're taught that we should be respectful. We are supposed to be submissive. We're supposed to just continue our lives without saying too many things. And it follows us even now as an adult. I was born in Guatemala. My children, similar to Perla's, are the first ones born here in the U.S. But all of us, all except my brother, were born in Guatemala. So having 6 women born in Guatemala, now we're all career women, we're married, we all have children, and we try our hardest to make sure that we raise strong, outspoken women because in my situation, because of something that occurred to me, I want my child to be able to come and have that honest conversation with me and be able to trust me and share whatever situation she may be.
Do you think that that's something that many women and men your age in the Hispanic community are moving towards? I know in the Irish Catholic community that I grew up in, I feel like I relate to that. I had similar sort of respect your elders. My grandmother was, sort of be seen and not heard. And so you couldn't push back on things that you really wanted to sort of correct and change. Whereas I look at my sister and how she's parenting, and it's much different than sort of where we came from or how my parents were raised. Do you think that that's a commonality?
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. I think like I said, I'm number 2, but I have an older sister, and she's very the one that takes care of that household. You know what I mean? Like as women, we're taught that we have to cook, we've got to clean, but we all work full time too, so we've got to work full time as well. But you're very right. I don't know if it's cultural. I want to say it may be having to do with coming from larger families. People that have large families and a lot of children were taught to do that way. Back in the day, and it doesn't necessarily have to be with the Hispanic community, we were, back in the day, they had multiple children to help raise the household, to provide, to farm, to do all of the things that comes with larger households. And even now, I try to make sure that my daughter, I've got 2 older boys and I've got a little girl, but if my daughter is interested in bike riding or karate, it's okay for her to be interested in certain things that maybe my parents didn't think were okay for me to participate in. So similar to what you're saying, my 2 older boys are definitely raised a lot different than I'm raising my little girl. I have younger sisters that are newer parents that have babies, and definitely the way I look up to them because I wish I would have been a little bit more free-spirited, I guess, when it comes to raising my kids.
Rosa, Can you talk about why being an active bystander in the Hispanic community can be complex?
Definitely. And actually, not only in the Hispanic community, but I think in any minority or underserved, marginalized population, especially when we talk about what an active bystander could be, right? So in our community, confidentiality as well as being within the community is so important. So this nuance for those that have migrated and come to the United States about being an active bystander and speak up and say something is very new and not seen with a lot of good eyes, because for us, that's like being a snitch. El chismoso del barrio, right? Like, who's this? And it also, the reality is that it's not safe. The standards of having a active bystander intervention, right? Or seeing something, depending on your legal status, on your confidence, even where you're coming from, might not be safe at all times. We've seen that now in the civil unrest in the United States, right? When people, men of color, have come forward to actually defend or help people in other situations, we've seen guns drawn at them. We've seen so many others going to prison or taken to ICE, right? Or immigration causes because they had spoken up. So that's part of that cultural humility and sensitivity, understanding sometimes when we are forcing terminology that is very gringo, anglo-sajon, we have to understand from the context of where that's coming for us, because once again, that active bystander is, you're a traitor. What are you doing? Chismoso. And we need to be able to give people space and to feel safe when it is and how it is that they are reporting things from occurring. And also knowing, even in the context of culture, right? We talked about Honduras and other cultures and Dominicans, but we also have to understand in the dynamics of the Latinx Hispanic community, there's a lot of marriages that occur at a very early young age, or even young love, right? And that is not seen with the eyes of perpetration of violence or sexual violence or anything in that manner. Is just, me enamoré joven. I fell in love early. That was my escape from home, right? So if we're looking at things from a lens that is not cultural and understanding of where it's coming from, we automatically associate it with, oh, we got to report, we got to do. And there has to be a balance in reference to that active bystander. And of course, you see something, you say something, but also understanding, am I safe? Who am I saying that to? What is my relationship with law enforcement? What is it that we as a American culture have systems of oppression, that there is a historical context of not trusting law enforcement in most of our Latinx and Hispanic communities, that is not something that you normally trust or go to. So to force our community at times to report is also traumatic at times, and it takes time to educate and for them to feel safe in doing so.
Absolutely, and it comes with an element of behavior change. And I think unless we address the systemic, racism within the police department and within the child services, we're going to continue to have marginalized and vulnerable communities, not want to report or become active bystanders. In the time between now and when we are able to fix those problems, have you seen success though in your community with taking care of each other in a way that doesn't sort of out anyone as a snitch, or preserves a family unit, that you can help people understand how to act in the interim?
Of course, and I think that it goes back to the question that you asked Sylvia before in reference to whether it's large family or coming or generational. I think their ageism also has to do with that active bystander, right? So the newer generation, the younger generation, those that are in school and high school and college that are receiving education in the format of what is healthy relationship and being an active bystander. We've seen how those educational pieces are so important. I also want to address that I just saw a comment where it says Latinos and not Latinx. That is another conversation that within our very heterosexual cultural language we need to go ahead and address, because that is also the component of whether we're being inclusive or exclusive, whether it is de la Real Academia de la Lengua Española accepts the X. What the X actually represents for the community is the inclusion of the LGBTQI community, right? So whether it is that we recognize or we accept the Latinos, Latinas, because we're always going on the pronouns of her, hers, or she, instead of including that class, we have to also understand that there is a group of Latinos and Hispanic that want to be recognized and labeled as Latinx or understand those components. So it's so important for us to also acknowledge that and leave the homophobia behind as we are addressing issues within our culture.
So I have a follow-up question that came in from someone who she self-identifies as a white woman, and she said that she heard us on another podcast, like sort of this conversation around the safety aspect of disclosure. And so, you know, she understands and recognizes that their reporting could potentially lead to danger. And so she's asking if there's another safer, more culturally sensitive way that she as a white woman can still keep children safe, knowing something's happening, but also hold adults accountable.
And are you asking me directly or any within the panel?
Anyone, yes, but happy to have you answer, but anyone.
So for us in particular, I am all about, we are mandated reporters, right? And I prefer at the end of the day as an organization for many of us, for systems to go ahead and do their due diligence and investigation, because when I have children cry and say, I wish somebody would have believed me. That for me is more important than anything else. But there are ways, right, as we're evaluating and studying cultures and understanding dynamics, to also recognize the continuous signs of abuse, especially sexual abuse within children. And we as adults, indistinctively of race, a culture, we have a responsibility, and we are the ones that are responsible for going ahead and ensuring the safety and well-being of that child. And my motto is, my personal motto, I prefer to say I'm sorry than to lament and be regretful that we did not do anything in due time.
Okay. Okay. Sylvia, Perla, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, with the whole, disclosures of children, and this is something, I have extensive experience facilitating a different program with the Catholic Church, and that was just a very safe spot where you had less than 30 people in a room, and it allowed for this type of conversation to happen. And it was more the conversation of not what the adult was not doing right when they thought that they had a suspicion of abuse, but then how do we turn it around and empower them that in the future, if they see something, they must say something, and it's the right thing to do. And that's the way that it's done in this country. Regardless of what happened to them and their personal experience and how somebody did not believe them, or they could not go to the authorities back wherever their country is right. Something that is different in the United States. And that's a conversation that needs to happen with a lot of the Hispanic community. And I've seen the aha moment in their eyes and body language. She's like, I can't do something about this. If my neighbor's kid is suffering through abuse or something else, I can report and I won't be in trouble for doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Sylvia, I'd love to go to your personal story, if that's okay. You share a lot in Stewards of Children about disclosure and your relationship with, your family. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I do want to address the question that I think it was Katelyn Weaves that she asked about being culturally sensitive. And you got to understand, I'm a grown woman. I'm over the age of 40, and I'm pretty set in my ways as well. But when I disclosed my abuse, I think it was as an adult, because when I tried to do it as a child, similar to what Rosa said, nobody believed me.
Mhm.
And I disclosed my, my situation during a darkness to light training that I was doing because I was adopting a child. And it was one of the, it wasn't required, it wasn't mandatory. It was a training that I selected to take as part of my adoption process. So when it comes to disclosing something, I don't ever want to identify it to some sort of culture or somebody's background. When somebody comes to you because something is going on, you're right, the law is going to take its place, the law is going to do what it needs to do. But as the person that I'm coming to, I want you to be educated and be ready to tell me the right thing, because if you shut me down, it's going to be a very hard conversation. It wasn't until I was in my 30s until I was able to bring it up again.
Mhm.
So when it comes to disclosing something, I share with a couple of the facilitators that I was out of town this past week, and I was in Wyoming. And in Wyoming, all in their public arenas or public restrooms, they had these signs that was a whole. It said something to the effect of, "I believe you. I believe you. You can count on me, and I will report it for you." So it was like 3 short terms that talked about, and it really spoke to me, especially as an adult. So Rosa mentioned that a lot of us, depending on the type of field of work that you do, you are mandated reporters. You are supposed to report. And under current circumstances, I do worry. I've noticed in my state of Georgia that maybe some of this sexual abuse are not being reported as much. And why is that happening? Because most of our children are virtually learning. They're at home with possibly some of their abusers. The teachers that are the ones that are the mandated reporters aren't able to create those relationships and connect with the children, that those could be the first line of defense when it comes to reporting something of this nature. A lot of things like sports are no longer occurring. My kid is no longer doing cheer or football or whatever other things going on. So again, the availability for a child to be able to report right now during the times of a pandemic, it is troubling to me. It is concerning to me. And I really think that only platforms similar to what you're currently doing, and knowing that we have 238 people currently live, you guys are the voices. You are the ones that are going to be out there, and hopefully, whether it's a neighbor, whether it's a group of the kids that you're around, it doesn't matter what country you're from, where you were raised, where you were born. If somebody comes to you sharing a situation, like, I need you to believe them and figure out what are the next words that are going to come out of your mouth when I come to you and tell you that something's going on.
I completely agree. I mean, we've seen so many news articles. RAIN, for instance, has said that this period of time is the most reported cases by children. I think it went up by 25% or something like that. I mean, it just, the struggle, and we do not even know the depths and the intensity of what is happening, and we won't until we go back to quote unquote normal, and we've got kids back in youth serving organizations in schools, and those who typically report are able to sort of reach back out to these kids. So that's such a great point.
Yeah, and for some of the parents that are virtually learning from home and working from home with your children, pay attention. I know we've got to work full time in front of our computers, but pay attention. I do belong to a lot of private Facebook groups, moms of my community, moms of my school cluster, and I do engage in conversations. And, I don't ever feel like when I act on something, it's overreacting, because if there's an action that occurs because of my overreacting, then that means I did my job. During one of the blogs or one of the private groups, a mom made a comment how she was watching her child and the child exposed himself, and she called the school immediately to report it because her child was traumatized and her child this. And then I stopped and I said, hey, did anybody take the time to figure out why a first grade child is exposing himself in front of the camera during school? What is going on? That is a learned behavior. What is going on in that household? But I knew the cluster, I knew the school, so I was the one that reported it to the school so somebody can go and check on that household. Whatever happened during that situation, I don't know, but as an advocate of a child, of a survivor of sexual abuse, somebody needs to follow up on that request.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Perla, I'd love to go back to you and talk a little bit about strategies that organizations can take right now to minimize opportunity for abuse.
Okay, so two very important things. One is access. So even though access is limited right now with whatever is going on in terms of programs and things that are being offered to the communities, taking the time to do 100% what you're supposed to do, screening properly, training properly, all the staff and volunteers that have access to youth is number one. That's the one of the main things that you have to do in that fence of protection. And secondly, the supervision. Like even though resources might be tight and whatever else, abuse does not occur in front of your eyes. It has to be on a one-on-one situation in an isolated place. So being able to identify what those isolated places might be in the facilities where children might be present is number one. And two, making sure that monitoring those areas is always part of the plan of supervision and having proper ratios going on when you have kids present. I mean, those are the kind of, practical things I can think about. I know working for the YMCA, that's something that I speak to the alliances and the CEOs, things that we cannot, not take seriously at this time. The proper screening and training of people before they get contact with children. And then once they're in the building, making sure that they are aware of the one-on-one interactions not being something that is, it's okay, number one, and two, being aware of those isolated areas and monitoring those areas at all times.
I mean, it makes so much sense to think about it on the forefront, because you're changing all organizations are changing how they're operating right now. So what worked before, right, it doesn't necessarily work now because we're in different situations and outside, and we've got new volunteers and all sorts of things. So we have to continue to integrate these ideas and these conversations and screenings, et cetera, and rethink of our policies as it pertains to the new organizations and the new activities that we're doing. I'd love to also think about, families. Rosa, are you seeing any good suggestions for families that really rely on other family members to babysit? And, now that a lot more people are home and working from home, what are you recommending to people?
That's a common practice within the Latino community, the Latinx community, and Hispanic community as a whole, because that's your network, right? So somebody that a family member or a friend or good friend of the family, or bringing the abuelita or somebody as an elder to take care of your children as you're going back to work, and even now being considered, right, an essential worker. So that is all part of the dynamics. But the reality is that we as a community are very trustworthy. And we build rapport, right, very quick. And it is so important for us to be able to understand that not everybody enters into our lives with the same intentions, and that things are not always the same as they were in our country, right? And that at the end of the day, nobody knows what is going on in anybody's mind or what processes they're going through right now. So for those that have family members taking care of the others, I normally recommend to the Hispanic family, are you certain? Are you sure? And if you see a changed behavior in that child, if they are neglected, or if they are telling you constantly, like, I don't want to be con tío Hector, I don't want to be in that house, or I don't want to go, that we need to listen. There is something going on, and it's not a tantrum attack, and it's not kids trying to go ahead and have their final word. It's that when you're not seeing, other things might be going on, right, that make that child not feel safe. So we have to be in tune, and just even the layers of stress, right, make people behave in different formats. And we also have to be in tune with that. Where are people and their fears, anxieties, their guilt, anger may be taken on the children that they are taking care of at that moment. And we have to be in tune with that. And how is it that they are being triggered, and how are they being treated?
Exactly. And this is, I think, where we talk about polyvictimization, right? We saw during the recession, after the economic collapse in 2008, higher instances of physical, mental, emotional abuse, as well as sexual abuse. So, you know, I know many of you work on sexual abuse, but you're also working on other forms of child abuse prevention. And I think that polyvictimization conversation is incredibly important, and how people change when they've lost their jobs, and when they feel like they're going to lose their jobs, they can't put food on the table, etc. I wanted to, a little bit of a deviation, but, and anyone can answer this. We have a question, can you clarify the difference between Latinx and Hispanic? Do the panelists have an opinion on the matter? So please feel free, anyone, to jump in.
I'll let Rosa take this one because the Latinx was enlightened to me. I mean, I could go with Latina, Hispanic, Latinx, you know, I'm inclusive like that.
Same. I am the same. I think Rosa's probably very passionate about it from what I can see. But like I said, I'm over 40 years old, so I'm like, call me Latina, call me Hispanic, you're not gonna offend me at all. But I do respect others' points of views. If you want me to call you something specific, I'm gonna do that out of respect for you.
Thank you, Sylvia and Perla. Echarme agua caliente. No, I'm just kidding. But it actually varies in the context of Hispanic as a form. When we go to understanding the dynamic, Hispanic is the language in itself, not necessarily predominantly where we're at. There are people that are very peculiar about if they are from Latin America, South America, Central America, understanding that they are treated as Latinx. That is why, how do you prefer, right? You prefer pronoun as well as how do you prefer to be identified. And normally the Hispanic is because of the culture that we speak Espanol, and that comes from Española. So normally Hispanic, when we go from a cultural context and looking at the maps and all of that, it intersects when we have Brazilians are Hispanic and not necessarily Latinos. So understanding that it's much more than just speaking the language is also depending on where you are located in the globe. And that is the difference. But I think that it's so important that as you're navigating in being cultural humble, ask them, what do you prefer? And also as you are translating materials or working with the community as itself, there's a lot of colorism within our culture in itself. There's a lot of change, and even the difference between Latinos, Latins, Latinx, also ask, because once again, some people don't want to be taken out. I prefer, right, to be called Afro-Latina Taína. That is my preference. But some people, even within the culture, do not identify themselves as Afro-Latino, right? They don't have the Black descendant or the Afro descendant within their heritage, or the Latinx, whether they don't want to say whether they're from the LGBTQI community, but as a whole of inclusiveness. So those confines of Hispanic versus Latino, I think that it has to be a preference on where, but also understanding that when they look at the globe, normally somebody from Brazil is not considered themselves Latino, but Hispanic. So that's important to understand in those dynamics.
And just to clarify for those who are less familiar with the geography and language, can you confirm that that's because it's Portuguese and from a Portuguese culture?
Correct.
Yes, okay.
Portuguese, French culture instead of Spaniard.
Exactly, okay, great. Thank you so much, because one of the other questions that they did have was, would love to hear the panelists' point of view on colorism. So I think it's really interesting that the answer to the first question also ties to the answer to that question as well. All right, so let's see, what other questions we have? Okay, so what about laws that are different in the US that don't allow for minors and adults to be engaging in sexual relationships? So for instance, I think in home countries, the age of consent might be different. So how do we, what's the best way to get us across the line in terms of communicating with immigrant populations in particular, who have different expectations of what the law actually, how it's different at home and in the US. Perla, have you had?
Yes, I think that would be a more like catered question to the instance where you're in front of somebody and they have that question. And I've been asked that question before, because you have a male who's way older than their girlfriend bride, who's a minor, but the relationship started back home and now they're here together. But they have to understand that here, the age of consent is such, it depends on each state and everything else. So it takes a little explanation on how the laws are different in terms of age of consent, when kids can get married, and if they need permission from their parents if they're going to marry before that. So having that information handy, even if you're not an expert on it, there's a whole lot of information online on all of those items that you can, pass on to people that are asking that type of question.
So I wonder, and I want to dig a little deeper in this, because we talk a lot about behavior change at Darkness to Light for any population. And the reality is you have to meet people where they are, right, in order to change their behavior. So we always talk about like the stages of change and how, some people are not even at the contemplation stage, that might be a problem in the United States. Never mind getting to an action stage where they, sort of say, okay, well, I'm either going to go home because I don't want to abide by the laws in my new country, or I have to change my behavior here in order to be able to stay here and not be, under any legal pressure. So can you talk a little bit about that conversation, that behavior change? Like, what brings you through from contemplation to action? Rosa, you're shaking your head. I'll pick on you.
It's so crucial, right, in reference to having that transformation and that carryover or change. But it is also based on trust, and that level of trust as you're having those conversations of, contemplating, and it's different, and you're here, and it also comes with adaptability, right, and understanding those dynamics. But it has to come from a place of trust, and as you're having the conversations, that you're always having the best intent in mind. There are very difficult conversations sometimes to have, because you want to modify behaviors, but behaviors, when they are learned inherently, it's very difficult at times, even if you are changing countries, right? Because you're adapting to so many other things, and you think that the things that you carry with you, the things that you believe, the things that you have always practiced, is what makes you whole, and not necessarily you are being defiant to your culture and what you learn, but it's having those deep conversations little by little, and knowing that it will take time. But they will get to understand this is why we do this here, without being forced, but understanding that it's with the best intent of continuing to change and modify behaviors, so that that child at the end can become a successful adult and have autonomy in their decisions.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough for those who are born and raised in the United States to change their behavior around child sexual abuse, to become active bystanders, to be willing to have the courage to disclose. And that's why you see the average age of disclosure sits at about 54. And so, to add on top of that, learning all of the new systems, potentially learning your second language, trying to find a job, all of the things that immigration status, provides, it's incredibly overwhelming. My wife is an immigrant, and we had all the resources available to us, and it was still one of the most difficult processes for her, and still is, to live in the United States and to understand how this country works. And we've done everything quote unquote right, but that doesn't mean that there isn't stress that's wrapped around that, and tension between your family members to try and sort of figure things out. So I definitely understand where you're coming from on that. To bring it back a little bit, Sylvia, I wanna ask you, and then we're gonna make sure that we've covered all the questions from the Q&A. What would you say to someone who might be experiencing or has experienced sexual abuse, and what would you want them to know, and what would you want their support system to know?
It's hard to disclose, especially as an adult. Like, I even think about, you know, as a kid, I never learned to skate. So as an adult, I'm terrified to put a pair of skates on because I may just fall and hurt myself, you know? So the older I get, the more afraid I get about trying new things, doing new things. And imagine being that vulnerable. You're supposed to be the mom, the rock of that household. How do you disclose something so vulnerable to somebody? So one of the things that I've noticed in my personal experience is just conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't know what I was getting myself into when I decided to participate in Darkness to Light. And there could be several, you know, months or weeks that I may not hear anything, but just recently, and I don't know if it's because it is Hispanic Heritage Month or because of certain things going on in our world, but my Facebook is not a private account, so anybody that knows my name can find me. And I've had two people, one from Ireland, that disclosed her abuse to me. And I think it was because she felt comfortable to share that vulnerability with me because she knew that I would understand where she was coming from. And then recently, another friend that I made via Facebook from the Netherlands, who also took the Darkness to Light training. So both of these women have taken this training and have found me on social media. So I think as an adult, it's easier for me to have a conversation with somebody that can understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
You know, Perla mentioned it and Rosa mentioned it. When it comes to our community, we tend to kind of find people that look like us, that talk like us, that eat like us, but we love to break bread. We love to drink cafecito. So when we have those conversations with each other, I think we are able to expose more of our vulnerabilities when it comes as an adult disclosing my abuse. As an adult, I think during another conversation that I had, you know, before I said I would participate in this, I had another one a couple of months ago with Oregon State. They had something similar to this. I had such a difficult time getting the first few words out of my mouth. I just broke down crying, not because there was 233 people watching us live, just because it's so hard to talk about those things. You know, it's hard as an adult. So, and then I mentioned during that conversation that when I was struggling, just like I was supposed to like be the keynote speaker and I'm supposed to say this speech, but I didn't even know like, okay, what are the first words? What am I going to say? And I mentioned it to one of my friends, and she's African-American, she's Black. And we were texting, and then she did, and the thing I love about women in particular is we're not going to pry too much. If you want to share something with me, I'm going to let you speak your mind. If you don't want to share because you feel like you're saying too much, I'm not going to pry to force you to say something that's going to make you uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So during our text conversation, I kind of mentioned, you know, I had this childhood trauma. They asked me to speak, and you know, I really don't know what to say. And then she responded with like, well, maybe you should see somebody, Sylvia, maybe talk to a professional. That's all she said. And then like a day or two passed, and she texted me. She's like, hey, I just wanted to check in on you, making sure you're doing okay. Hopefully your speech is coming out okay. And then I responded to her jokingly, and I said, you know what? I said, Hispanics don't go to counseling. Like, who am I going to talk to? We don't go to counseling. And her response was perfect, because she responded with, girl, Black people don't go to counseling either, so you should be fine. So it's those vulnerabilities as we get older. It's easy for me to tell you, yeah, find somebody, talk to a professional, but we don't do that. I don't think I've ever actually talked to a counselor about my abuse. I've shared it with the world. I shared it with people that I met on social media. I shared it with you. I'm able to write about it, but actually sit down and have that conversation with a professional, I've never really done. I know it's not healthy not to share your situation. So I guess as an adult, it's finding my network that makes me feel comfortable and able to talk about the subject which is similar to this platform, that is the only way I feel comfortable, and I personally feel that that is my therapy.
Perla and Rosa, I see you shaking your head violently in agreement that you don't go to counseling. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I feel like
no, this is the truth. It's just, and I love it because Sylvia put it on her blog, and it's so true. Like, you know, there's a stigma about child abuse. Like, if you're abused and it's a family member, if you say something, you're the snitch. If you say something, they're not going to believe you. You're going to break the whole family. There's a lot of fear around it. But then, if you come forward and you have the support, there's still this stigma about getting help. Like, what do you mean you need help? And you need to go talk to someone and sit on a couch. And that whole thing, I mean, I don't know if it's cultural, but it's just something that I can speak for, you know, my family and what I know from the Latin culture is not something that is seen as the go-to in terms of support. They're like, okay, so you said something, we believe you, let's leave it at that. And that also comes from people's own experience of abuse, that they have not talked to anyone or reached out for support. So they're like, I got over it, so you're gonna get over it as well. That's very important.
So is it a weakness? Is it consume? Oh, okay, a weakness.
A weakness in character, and more so if it's coming from a male. And that's where the macho mentality comes into this whole conversation is if you have a boy or a teenage boy who was abused, who told his story, now he's seen as broken, he's seen as weak, and then if he needs that type of support and want to go to therapy, even more so.
Mm-hmm.
And then also the layer of, you know, sexual assault and rape are the most underreported crimes, right? Within the United States. But then within the Latinx Hispanic community, you never talk about sex. And they associate that automatically, right? Those deep experiences, you never talk about rape, you don't talk about incest, the same thing about you don't talk about politics, right? Within family reunions. So how dare you go and speak to a professional about the internal issues of our family and put us to shame? How dare you put the dirty laundry out there? So those are part of the way that we were also raised, right? And getting away from those stigma of analyzing even those that practice faith has somebody to speak with, right? Or you can afford this, or are you local? They automatically associating counseling with also the stigma of mental health, right? And that you are going to be confined. So there's a lot of layers in reference to not receiving the counseling within our community, and who is it that you're actually going to speak with, and who is your network, and how do you feel comfortable. And that's also part of the beauty of the autonomy of understanding that we all heal differently. And it's not only cultural, but it's also generational in understanding that we have to respect how others want to heal. So for my mother's generation and grandmother's generation, who? Never. For my generation, it's a little like, what do you mean? No. If they did that once, we're done. Adios. For my daughter, right, and my granddaughter is like, oh no, we got to talk about this. This is a family reunion, and let's come together. Yeah, we're going to talk about this, and this is coming out, and we'll blast you on Facebook and all the social media, but we're talking about this. So there are other layers and other isms within just the culture aspect of understanding how are we navigating through these issues, how are we speaking about it, and how are we recognizing and coming and busting the myths that actually exist within our communities.
Oh, there's so much to pull from there, and I feel seen by the chat, because let me tell you, we just got about 15 new questions with 8 minutes left to go. I think one thread was the religion aspect. So yes, we probably, this community maybe doesn't do counseling as much, but there is a heavy religious aspect, and I felt that. I feel like your grandmother, Rosa, and my grandmother would have gotten along very well. That beautiful Irish Catholic woman. And because there wasn't conversation about sex. So can we use religion because that's where people are going to go to try and help people find solutions and support in a sexual abuse case? Perla, Rosa, Sylvia?
Yes, I mean, I can speak for the Archdiocese of Atlanta and some other colleagues around the country. And a lot of dioceses, unfortunately, after the scandal in the early 2000s, there's a charter for the protection of children and young people that requires dioceses to offer all this type of help to their community. So it would be a great resource for everybody to check out their diocesan website, because you probably will be able to connect with the person who does the safe environment, which would be the child protection side, and the victim assistance work. A lot of dioceses, offer all kinds of retreats and other programs within the diocese that support survivors of abuse, and not only sexual abuse, every type of abuse. So I would just encourage people to check out those resources.
And Perla, are priests required to report?
No, they're not. So yes, there's a yes, no. When people do go to confession, no, that's something that is not reportable, and that's written in a lot of the laws in different states, and that's something that people want to, fight against, kind of like this also being another thing that is disclosed. But at this time, I can speak for Georgia and a lot of other states. Yes, it's still something that is under the seal of confession, so it does not have to be reported if somebody comes forward to a priest during the confession. However, the priests are being trained so that way they speak to that person and ask them to come speak to them more in a one-on-one type of setting. So that way they're kind of encouraging them to tell that story away from the confessional setting.
Yeah, and that's within the Catholic Church. So I am on the other end, Pentecostal or from other faith-based organizations. So in Ohio, ministers are mandated reporting as well in reference to they consider, not necessarily the priest. So there is a movement within the Me Too movement that it happens in church too, right? And how important it is to actually go. But your question in particular, Calvin, in reference to faith, right, or religion. Religion doesn't save, but faith in itself. And within our Hispanic culture, our Latino culture, faith is imperative for everything that goes on. Everybody and anybody believes in something. Diosito, Santito, anything, Virgencita, whatever it is, there is that level of they believe in something. So the faith-based organizations are a catalyst of change and resource for a lot of their members. And that's why it's so imperative that as advocates, as community-based agencies, as Darkness to Lights, as advocate, you do find a way of navigating within the communities of faith that the Latinx Hispanic community practices, because they will disclose to ministers, their first ladies, the priests, anybody within their community of faith, because they believe that, whether it is in prayer, in confession, in women's retreats, in groups and support groups. And it's so important for us to be able to have those dual conversations and understanding, not only to train, but also to protect, right? And for the faith-based organizations to understand that they also have a responsibility, especially with those minors.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And I think, you could take what you just said and apply that to any institution that works with children, and there is 100% responsibility on the shoulders of adults and leaders within those institutions to be taking care of kids. I know a couple people have asked, is abuse predominantly done by another family member? I'll answer from a Darkness to Light perspective that 90% of the time abuse happens. It happens by someone that the child knows and trusts. 30% of the time it is a family member. I don't know if anyone is aware of any different statistics specifically for the Latinx or Hispanic community, but yes, the answer is it is predominantly done by someone that you know and trust, and 30% of the time it is a family member. Unfortunately, we are not going to be able to get to all of these amazing questions. But I just wanted to also mention again that we are going to be translating this into Spanish. We will also make sure that all of the resources that have been mentioned today are in the blog notes, if you will. And we will have subtitles for those who are hard of hearing so that you can make sure that you can read what everyone has said as well. I'll just throw it out to each one of you. Is there anything in the last 2 minutes that you want to make sure that our attendees know that we didn't cover or touch on?
There is something I do want to mention. Besides
course.
natural mentality is the foundation of how important family and family to us could be extended family, especially being new to this country. Friends become family, your neighbors become your family. That's another factor that people working with children who are abused need to consider, that even though it's not a blood relative, it might be another fellow immigrant that came and they live in the same household that they consider family. So sometimes disclosure is difficult in that way, and for the other adults to, react responsibly to what might be going on.
I also want to mention that there are healthy adult relationships. Not every person that I come in contact with, I'm afraid that they're going to do something to my dog. That's why we have so many rules, regulations. We've got things in our own households that we put in place when it comes to our children and the safety of our children. Another thing that I do personally for myself and for my community, I'm also in Georgia, Perla, so we'll have to do a cafecito soon. What I do in my community is I am on the board of one of our metro school systems for the Hispanic mentoring priority. So I'm on the board to be a member, and I mentor 3 middle school females. And we meet via Zoom because the schools are closed. I used to go to the school and have lunch with them once a week. But that is my way to advocate for other Latinas, Hispanics, other females that I want to offer them a safe space. We don't talk about school. We talk about just what's going on. We have lunch together, and we just talk about just general stuff. So healthy relationships are out there, and everybody that was able to join us live, everybody that's here via Zoom, you guys are all advocates. What are you doing to help the Hispanic community? If we're here to talk specifically for our community, what are you doing to advocate for us? Are you providing a safe space to have conversation with our community, with our children, and continue to keep?
Amazing. I love that. I love that individual mentorship. Changing even one person's life changes the trajectory of an entire family. I think that's amazing. Rosa, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
I know we don't have much time, but for those that are joining us, believe, support, hold, healed, and understand how important it is that in order for the Hispanic community to disclose, to trust, your organizations have to have a cultural shift. It's not just out of tokenism that you hire somebody that speaks Spanish or looks like the community. Is that your entire organization is welcoming, it's colorful, is transparent, and is finding solutions with them in mind. Ask them what they need, ask them what they want, stand with them, believe, support, and just be there. But start doing the work inside.
Ooh, I could not have said it better myself. I love that. Thank you for ending our session today with such a beautiful call to action. I think it's important to internalize that. My team would kill me if I did not mention that we are going to have another conversation next week. And this is to specifically talk about how we can support the Hispanic community and Latin community by through parents and caregivers. It's on October 21st at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So mark your calendars. And ladies, this has been an absolute pleasure for me. Thank you so much for honoring Darkness to Light with your knowledge and your experience. And Sylvia, for years and years of Stewards of Children trainings, we just passed 2 million people. So you should be very proud of all of the work that you've done for the communities across the country and around the world.
Voice for some of us that didn't have a voice, don't have a voice. All of the panelists and all of the instructors and facilitators, I can't do it without every single one.
Well, thank you. And Rosa, Perla, thank you so much for all you do in your communities. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll be in touch soon.